People are flawed. Humans are flawed. But for some reason, when someone claims to be godly, a servant of the Lord, we place them on a pedestal. We assume they're more righteous, more moral, more perfect. But that illusion, it's dangerous. Because time and time again, we see that those who preach the loudest can also hide the darkest truths. Those who stand behind pulpits, who speak of salvation, sin, and the sanity of life are not immune to evil. In fact, sometimes they wear their faith like a mask that makes them more dangerous. They know what's right, they speak it, they claim to live by it, but still, they fall harder, louder, bloodier. These so-called messengers of God are not beyond sin, and when they fall from grace, they take others down with them. Which brings us to Georgia, a young man aspiring to be a pastor just like his father, a youth leader, a believer, a friend, and a killer. Joshua Drucker didn't just commit the ultimate crime, the ultimate sin. He committed betrayal. He murdered two people who trusted him, two people he called friends. And when asked why, his answer was cold. Revenge. So what could push a youth pastor, someone entrusted to guide others through the light, to step so deep into darkness? Did he snap? Was it planned? Or did he believe he was carrying out divine justice? This is the story of Joshua Drucker, a man who preached salvation but chose murder instead. Because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Joshua Kevin Drucker grew up in McDonough, Georgia, a small southern city in the heart of Henry County, a suburb of Atlanta. McDonough is known for its small-town vibe and southern charm. It's the kind of place people describe as perfect for raising a family, and that's exactly what the Druckers did. For Doug and Wanda Drucker, it was love at first sight. They married in the 1980s after just 6 months of knowing each other. Wanda was a nurse, and Doug, after spending his life devoted to the Lord, soon was offered the role of a pastor at Gospel Outreach Church, a small, non-denominational country church in nearby Stockbridge, Georgia. The Druckers had 4 children, Wendy the oldest, followed by Ryan, Joshua, and Amanda, the baby of the family. From the outside looking in, they appeared to be the perfect all-American Southern religious family. And even though Doug fulfilled what he called his life mission of being a professional Christian, he later admitted that he often worked long hours and took extra jobs just to put food on the table for his kids. Later reflecting that he was often too busy raising the kingdom of God to actually raise his own children. But Doug absolutely loved what he did. He loved preaching, he loved ministering to people from all walks of life. This was his calling. And so he made sacrifices, doing his best to juggle his devotion to ministry while being a father to 4. That relationship with faith and their tight-knit family bond remained strong through all the hurdles and hardships life would throw their way. For them, struggle was part of the purpose. It was a kind of spiritual mission. And while Pastor Doug led his congregation as the head of the church, he also led his family, with young Joshua watching closely. Joshua was a devout Christian from an early age. Surrounded by faith and immersed in the gospel, Gospel Outreach Church became kind of like a second home for both him and his younger sister Amanda. They loved going to church. They loved hearing their father preach. Joshua, inspired by his father's passion, decided early on in his life that he wanted to follow in his footsteps and also become a pastor. As a teenager, Joshua began leading a Bible study group of his own at his father's church. It quickly became clear this was also his calling, his passion, guiding others in their relationship with Christ, striving to be an upstanding member of the community. Like clockwork, every Sunday, local kids and teens would gather to hear Reverend Doug's sermon, then head to Joshua's youth group, where he preached the next generation of the church.
It basically didn't matter what you had been through or what you were going through, you were welcome there. And I really loved the church.
Friends and church members all agreed. Josh was a fantastic and inspiring youth pastor. He supposedly knew the Bible inside and out. He led with intention and had a gift for relating scripture in a way that kids and teens could actually understand. He was motivational, approachable, and wise beyond his years. Everyone in the community looked up to him. It truly seemed like he was following in his father's footsteps, destined to become the next leader of their small southern church. But as godly as the Druckers appeared on the outside, they were not without struggles, nor without tragedy. At times, countless tragedies would question Reverend Doug Drucker's faith and the lifelong servitude he offered to God. Struggles that would not only impact the Drucker family, but leave a lasting impression on many others caught in their wake. Joshua and Amanda, only 2 years apart in age, were best friends. In addition to growing up together in their father's church, they spent most of their free time side by side. They shared mutual friends, common interests, and for the most part, they were always together. Their sibling bond was just something special. But that dynamic actually began to shift when a new man would enter Amanda's life. David Andrew Robertson. But David would go by his middle name, Andrew. And at the time, he was working as a bouncer at a popular Atlanta nightclub called Backstreets. It was November 2002 when Andrew first met Amanda. She had been trying to get into the club that night when he had actually spotted her. According to one of Amanda's friends who was with her, the chemistry between them was instant. You could literally feel the attraction in the air.
He was looking at her and she was looking at him, and it was just like magnets.
And from that moment on, Amanda and Andrew were inseparable. But Andrew came from a world very different from the Druckers. Originally from Canada, he had been put up for adoption at a very young age and was later adopted by a wealthy, privileged family. He was the middle child, and while he loved his adopted parents, he always wrestled with the pain of being given up as a baby and never fully understanding why. Andrew was the black sheep, a rebel, independent, and a little rough around the edges, covered in tattoos, quiet, and a little mysterious. He didn't look or act anything like the Drucker family, but underneath it all, he had a good heart. He walked to the beat of his own drum. He was also nearly 2 decades older than Amanda, but she didn't care. The two clicked almost immediately, and before long, they were officially a couple. Before Amanda ever actually met Andrew, she was already facing demons of her own. At just 21 years old, she found out that she was pregnant. Her parents weren't really thrilled about their daughter having a child out of wedlock, but something about this pregnancy seemed like a turning point for Amanda. At the time, Amanda smoked, drank regularly, and didn't take great care of herself. But when she found out that she was going to be a mother, that's when supposedly everything changed. She quit smoking, she stopped drinking, she started going back to church, and even moved back in with her parents so that she could get her life back on track for her baby. And not soon after, Amanda actually gave birth to a baby boy named Connor, and by all accounts, he was perfect. Everyone loved him. But everything changed one night when Connor was just 6 months old. Amanda had gone out of town for one night, and her father, Reverend Doug, was actually watching baby Connor. That night, after putting Connor to bed, Reverend Doug fell asleep himself. But when he woke up the next morning, Connor was cold, still, unresponsive. The family later learned that Connor had died from sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, at just 6 months old. The tragedy shattered Amanda. She began slipping further and further into a deep depression. Her regular church attendance faded, and she was plagued by guilt, even though SIDS is often unexplainable. She still blamed herself. And that's what made her connection with Andrew feel so important when they met. Like maybe, just maybe, life was finally starting to come together for her again. But not everyone saw it that way. The age gap between Amanda and Andrew didn't sit very well with her parents. Amanda had just turned 22, Andrew was 40. Her parents were deeply uncomfortable with the relationship and didn't really trust Andrew or his intentions with their daughter. They felt something about him just seemed off, and they had urged their daughter Amanda to stay away, but she didn't care. At some point, Amanda actually brought her older brother Joshua to the club so that he could meet Andrew for himself. She wanted her big brother's approval. She respected his opinion. And at first, Josh, like his parents, was a little skeptical. But the more time the three of them spent together, the more, just like Amanda, they all just seemed to click with Andrew. Just as Amanda and Andrew had become inseparable, so did Andrew and Josh. And despite their different backgrounds, the two men bonded almost instantly. And for preachers' kids, the Drucker children didn't exactly fit that stereotype. They partied, they drank, they went to raves. Sure, people like to joke around about how preachers' kids, like to rebel every now and again, but for the Druckers, it ran a little bit deeper. At one point or another, each of the four siblings struggled with some form of addiction, but none more than Josh. Later on, detectives would describe Josh's personality as almost Jekyll and Hyde-like. On Sundays, he appeared to be the perfect man of God, preaching, inspiring, someone you could look up to. But during the week, it was a completely different story. It felt like Josh was a completely different person. Josh started smoking weed at just 13 years old. By his early 20s, his drug use had escalated. He became addicted to methamphetamine. And then by the time he was 25, he had been in and out of jail for petty theft, drug charges, and even an aggravated assault against an ex-girlfriend. But to those who knew him, Josh was still a good person at heart. Yes, he made mistakes, and he owned up to them. He never let go of his belief that he was still called by God to preach, and he believed that his struggles were a part of his testimony. Amanda, Andrew, Josh, and a close-knit group of friends all started spending all their time together. They partied, did drugs, and hung out like any other group of young adults trying to forget their pain. Andrew's house was near Marietta and became the go-to hangout spot, equal parts party pad and also equal parts escape. But just months after Amanda first met Andrew, the lives of the Druckers and everyone around them would change forever. Andrew kept OxyContin painkillers at his house, left over from injuries that he had sustained during contracting work that he did on the side. Meanwhile, Amanda was slowly sinking deeper into a depression, still grieving the loss of her son and just battling emotional and inner turmoil. Looking for, just a brief escape, she started taking some of Andrew's pills. Now, it's unclear whether Andrew knew Amanda was using his medication, but according to her friends, he did, and they warned her to be careful. Then on February 21st, 2003, just 1 week after Valentine's Day, everything changed. It was supposed to be just another night. Andrew and Amanda had a few friends over at their place, just hanging out as usual. At some point, Andrew later claimed that he and Amanda had a minor argument, nothing too serious, and they both decided to just shrug it off and go to bed. But shortly after, Andrew was jolted awake by a loud bang that he heard coming from another room. He looked over and noticed that Amanda wasn't in bed, so he got up to check, and that's when he found her lying on the floor, unconscious. His bottle of OxyContin pills was beside her. He knew immediately that she had overdosed. But instead of calling 911 right away, Andrew called Josh first. He told him what had happened, asked what he should do, and Josh urged him to call 911 that instant. Amanda was rushed to the hospital, but her condition was critical, and at one point, she was pronounced dead 4 separate times. She was clinging on to life. Her parents were actually in Florida at the time visiting their eldest daughter, Wendy, when they had received the call that Amanda was on life support. She had no brain activity. Doctors didn't think that she was going to make it through the night. The only thing keeping her alive was a respirator. And it was quickly discovered that Amanda had indeed overdosed on a combination of OxyContin and Xanax. Authorities suspected that it was possibly a suicide attempt, but her family never really believed that story. They insisted that Amanda wasn't trying to end her life, that she was trying to escape the pain, just temporarily. She wasn't trying to die. When the Druckers arrived at the hospital, dozens of church members were already there, filling the waiting room, praying for a miracle. The family had already buried baby Connor. They couldn't lose Amanda too. But doctors were blunt with them. Amanda was brain dead, and they recommended that the family to take her off life support. But the Druckers refused. They were still clinging on to hope. They believed in miracles. They believed that God would intervene. And amazingly, after several agonizing days, Amanda did wake up from her coma, but the damage had already been done. Her emotional scars were now physical. Because her brain had been deprived of oxygen for so long, Amanda had actually suffered permanent severe brain damage. Though, thankfully, she was alive, she was never going to be the same ever again. At just 22 years old, Amanda could no longer walk or talk. Now, she was confined to a wheelchair and had lost most motor function. She was going to need full-time care for the rest of her life. Still, the Druckers thanked God that Amanda had survived. They believed it was all part of a larger divine plan. Again, that this was just a part of their journey to walk together. But for Andrew, everything changed as well. In the eyes of the Drucker family and nearly everyone around them, Andrew instantly became the villain. He was blamed and he was shunned. He was not able to have any contact with Amanda moving forward. Even their close friends turned on him. The pills were his, and she was with him when it all happened. And for that, people held him responsible for what happened to Amanda.
People that were close to Amanda at the time, they laid some of the blame, I think, at Andrew's feet because she was with him when she overdosed.
It wasn't Josh's fault. Nobody did this to her. She didn't do it to herself. It was an accident.
Andrew carried that guilt heavily. He did feel responsible, but at the same time, no one had forced Amanda to take the pills. And Amanda, even though she did survive, wouldn't be the only person that Andrew would lose. He lost all his friends, his so-called makeshift family in Georgia. But in the end, only one person stood by him, Josh. Josh was the only one who publicly defended him, the only one willing to admit or just even say that Amanda's overdose had been a tragic accident all along. And for a short time, a very short time, it seemed like things were slowly getting back to normal. Andrew and Josh were hanging out again, friends like they used to be, partying like they used to. No one brought up Amanda's accident. So to Andrew, it felt like forgiveness, like their friendship was still intact. But what Andrew didn't know was that Josh had been quietly holding on to something much darker, resentment. He never actually truly forgave Andrew. And over time, that bitterness began to grow inside Josh, quietly festering beneath the surface. Why Josh chose to keep Andrew in his life is unclear to this day. Maybe he tried to bury those emotions. Maybe he thought pretending everything was fine would actually make it so in real life. But deep down, a storm was building inside him. Meanwhile, Andrew just wanted life to go back to normal. He began dating again. This time, a 25-year-old Bulgarian woman named Laura Nichole, who was in the area actually on a student visa. Just like Amanda, the two had met at the club, and the two quickly hit it off. Laura had actually just arrived in Atlanta in July 2023 after joining a student summer work program. She had a job as a swimming pool lifeguard and was only supposed to be in the States temporarily, but had soon decided that she wanted to move in with Andrew and stay in the United States permanently. But while Andrew tried to move forward with his life, Josh was slipping further into darkness. Much like Amanda had used pills to dull her pain, friends believe Josh began using meth more heavily to escape the guilt and trauma of Amanda's condition. His drug addiction worsened, and he actually temporarily stepped away from the church altogether. Even though on the surface, Andrew and Josh were still best friends, cracks started to form. Josh began talking to others about his true feelings. He told friends that he was still very much angry with Andrew, angry about what happened with Amanda, angry about the past. And when Andrew started dating Laura, it seemed like that resentment deepened even more. Josh worried something bad would happen to her too. He also was mad about the life that Amanda now couldn't have. Friends later said that Josh started secretly seeing Laura behind Andrew's back. That betrayal only further fractured their already fragile friendship. And everything came to a head on the night of April 5th, 2004. It started out like any other night. Friends were hanging out at Andrew's house near Marietta. As the night wound down, Josh and a mutual friend named Melissa just so happened to stop by, just like they had so many times and nights before. No arguments, no tension. Josh, Andrew, Melissa, and Laura were all just casually talking and laughing. It was just another night. Until suddenly, it wasn't. Without warning, Josh reached into a drawer, pulled out one of Andrew's guns, and shot him in the head at point-blank range. Andrew was killed instantly. Laura obviously began screaming and panicking. She lunged at Josh, trying to wrestle the gun away from him. And in the chaos, Josh turned and ended up shooting her too, right in the head. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Melissa, also terrified, pleaded for her life, but Josh promised that he wouldn't hurt her. But before they left, he shot Laura a second time, making sure that she was in fact dead. Then he ransacked their house, stealing jewelry, money, and even their cell phones. Before leaving, he had threatened Melissa, warning her not to call the police. Melissa says that's why she stayed silent, at least for a while.
Josh had told me that if you called the police, whoever was looking for you would get you before the police got to you. And at the time, in living the lifestyle that I lived, I believed that that was true.
But as it always does, the truth would soon come out. Just days later, Josh showed up at his father's house, his face pale, his hands shaking. And that's when he confessed. He told his father, Pastor Doug Drucker, that he had killed someone, that he had killed his best friend, Andrew. Well, his once best friend, his sister's former boyfriend. And Reverend Doug was, obviously stunned. Like any father, he was heartbroken. The two knelt together and prayed, asking for God's forgiveness. But after Josh left, Doug knew what he had to do. He called the police, turning his son in. And then on April 7th, 2004, just 2 days after the killings, Josh and Melissa were found at a local motel and arrested by Cobb County police officers. And during his interrogation, Josh didn't hold anything back. He told investigators that the murder had been a long time coming, that his emotions had been boiling over for nearly a year, that by this point, he couldn't sleep, and that he had blamed Andrew for everything that happened with his sister, Amanda. According to him, that rage had built up inside of him until that night he had just snapped.
They hurt my sister. My sister. I've been wanting to get it back in. Right here over there. Couldn't take it more.
What all did you take from the house, Josh?
A wallet. Those are cell phones. I grabbed some jewelry.
Where was that?
In the drawers.
In the bedroom? Take any money?
Well, yeah, in the wallet.
He said he killed Andrew for revenge, but when officers asked him why he killed Laura as well, his answer was equally chilling. According to him, it was because she was a witness. She saw exactly what happened. And it was that single fact, the cold-blooded execution of an innocent woman, that led prosecutors to pursue the death penalty against Josh Drucker. And that's when he was charged with capital murder in both the deaths of Andrew Robertson and Laura Nichole. But Josh initially pleaded not guilty. His defense attorney, Jimmy Berry, told reporters that the primary goal was to avoid the death penalty and to force the state to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. At trial, the defense claimed Josh never intended to kill Laura. According to them, they argued that the gun went off accidentally during a struggle. But even as they tried to explain her death away, Josh never denied his motive for killing Andrew. Simply revenge. What Andrew believed to be a casual get-together among friends actually turned out to be an ambush. Prosecutors alleged that Josh premeditated the murder, knowing where the gun was, waiting for the moment, and then executing Andrew at point-blank range. It was calculated, they said, cold-blooded, but still. Josh's attorneys asked the jury for mercy. They presented medical testimony from several doctors who said Josh had suffered from organic brain damage that impaired his judgment, in addition to having bipolar disorder. All of this layered on top of his worsening methamphetamine addiction, they argued, Josh wasn't in his right mind. Witnesses confirmed that Josh's drug use had spiraled in the months leading up to the murders, and they painted a picture of a man unraveling under the weight of unbearable grief. First, the loss of his infant nephew, baby Connor, and then his sister Amanda's tragic overdose, which left her brain damaged and permanently disabled. No one disputed that Josh had pulled the trigger. The question before the jury wasn't who did it, but why. Prosecutors called him a drug-fueled, remorseless killer. The defense described him as a broken man, pushed over the edge by personal tragedy and mental illness. But then there was the money. Prosecutors introduced a possible financial motive to the crime. They claimed that Josh may have learned that Andrew had recently withdrawn $30,000, money that was intended for a wedding and a trip to Bulgaria for both him and Laura. Could that have been the reason why he pulled the trigger? One of the more unexpected witnesses was a waitress from a local strip club that Josh had frequented. She testified that he was well known in the club scene, nicknamed the Money Thrower, and she had last spoken to him actually just hours before the murders occurred. She told the court that Josh had become increasingly erratic. He confided in her about Amanda, saying that she had tried to take her own life, that she was now a vegetable in the hospital. He blamed Andrew, said the man who gave her those pills deserved to die. According to her, he even asked her, "Don't you think he deserves to die?" And when she told Josh no, that Andrew wasn't responsible, and if anything, he likely didn't even know Amanda had taken the pills. But according to her, Josh didn't like that answer, so he then offered her meth and pressured her to drink with him. And when she refused, she said Josh flew into a rage, grabbed her arm, and threatened that he would kill her. Security actually had to remove him from the club that night. But she wasn't the only witness. The prosecution's star witness, however, was someone much closer to the crime, Melissa McCrayer. Just 20 years old at the time, Melissa had been dating Josh, supposedly. She was also a drug user and a stripper as well. She testified that the plan that night was simple. They went to Andrew's house to get drugs. She recalled sitting casually at the kitchen table with everyone, Andrew, Laura, and Josh. At the time, everything felt normal. Then Josh asked Andrew for some marijuana, and that's when she claims the two men stepped out of the room. Moments later, she heard a single gunshot. Melissa testified that she watched Andrew collapse to the ground immediately. Laura screamed and rushed at Josh, beating her fists against his chest and yelling repeatedly, "No, no, no, you killed him." And that's when, according to Melissa, he shot her too. And then the courtroom went silent. In her closing statement, Senior Assistant District Attorney Ann Harris urged jurors to consider the brutality of the murders, their deliberate, shocking nature, and asked for the harshest sentence available. The defense pleaded with the jury not to take a life for a life, but the verdict came swiftly. In less than 3 hours, the jury found Josh Drucker guilty of murder. He was also convicted of armed robbery, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and credit card fraud. The sentence, death. After hearing the verdict, Josh reportedly turned to his crying family and friends who were seated in the courtroom. And in a calm voice, he told them, "It's okay." And when deputies tried to quiet him, Josh is said to have looked around and muttered the words, "What are you going to do? Kill me?" Today, Josh Drucker sits on death row at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. His world is now reduced to a cold 8 by 6 foot concrete cell as he waits for the day he's transferred to the so-called death house, where lethal injection is carried out. But during his time in prison, Josh claims he has undergone a spiritual transformation. He says he used these years to reform, to reconnect with his faith, and to lead others down a different path. He now leads a Bible study group inside the prison and even runs a digital ministry from behind bars. For over 2 decades, Josh has written sermons from his cell, handwritten and sent home to be typed up and emailed out to an audience of about 300 people. In a letter from prison, Josh wrote that he has felt the wicked acts of Satan firsthand, as he believes the enemy has tried to destroy his life, his family, and his calling. But still, he insists he harbors not one single ounce of resentment toward his father for turning him in. In fact, Doug Drucker continues to be a steady presence in his son Josh's life. During visits, the elder Drucker prays not only with his son, but also with other death row inmates as well and their families. Josh credits his parents for instilling in him one core value that still resonates behind bars: love the ones that no one else will. In 2008, the Druckers' church foreclosed. They had to give up their physical location, but not their faith. Doug continued his ministry online, and every Sunday he still travels to the Jackson State Prison to pray with the families whose loved ones are awaiting execution. Yet tragedy continued to follow their family. In late 2013, their eldest daughter, Wendy, died unexpectedly. She suffered cardiac arrest while being held in the Henry County Jail on a probation violation. The charges against her were dropped for lack of evidence just one day after she was hospitalized, and unfortunately, she never regained consciousness. 3 days later, her family made the heart-wrenching decision to remove her from life support at the Piedmont Henry Hospital. Now, despite the immense loss, the deaths, the addiction, the grief, the Reverend Doug Drucker says his faith has only deepened. It's shaken, but not completely shattered. Tested, but not abandoned. He continues to preach, he continues to pray, and he continues to love, practicing what he preaches. In the end, Josh Drucker was the product of both scripture and sorrow. A pastor's son raised to believe in mercy, yet consumed by a need for justice that ended up curdling into revenge. His story is a haunting contradiction. A man taught to turn the other cheek who instead reached for a gun. And now, from behind prison walls, he preaches forgiveness. But the question still lingers: can a man who once doubted God's mercy truly speak for it, especially after taking it from others with his own hands? Now, scripture teaches us grace, and for someone who knew the Bible like the back of his hand, it's hard not to wonder or ask, why didn't he choose forgiveness over vengeance? Yes, his mind was clouded by addiction and drugs, but for someone raised to walk in God's light, it's chilling to see how far he strayed. And ultimately, in the end, he committed the ultimate sin. Not only murder, but betrayal of everything he was raised to believe in. This case reminds us that no one is immune to the darkness, not even those who seem chosen. Everyone is flawed, everyone sins, and everyone makes mistakes. But why didn't Josh live by the word he now tries to teach? The Druckers have endured unfathomable tragedy, and it forces us to question and ask, how much suffering can one family endure or even bear? Accident or not, the ripples of Amanda's overdose stretch far. Would Andrew and Laura still be alive today if that night had just never happened? Would Josh still be a free man, or did the darkness in him always have a countdown? Because one thing is certain, the court may have delivered its verdict, the final judgment has been made, but Joshua Drucker's story is far from over.